Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and this is take 2 of the latest episode of Iowa's most unprepared and unrehearsed conservative talk podcast. I'm joined here with John Hendrickson and Chris Ingstad, and we are ready to excite you and thrill you and inform you. So, John, did I do better on take 2?
You did, yes.
Good. Let's hope that I remember to delete out take 1 so it doesn't sound really awkward. But yeah, Chris is just like, oh my gosh, get me out of here. So.
To some of our pre-production meeting, that's what happens when you try to stay on a script.
Yes.
Yeah, you are better shooting from the hip all the way around.
Just press record and let's go. So we're back here with the we're at full strength in the office. Break's over and we're ready to get back to work. So Chris, did you catch any March Madness? Any college basketball games?
No.
That's really disappointing.
I've been watching some World Baseball Classic.
That's good.
Yeah.
I did see the clip of the Japanese announcers freaking out when they got their go-ahead win against Mexico. I saw that this morning. That was exciting. Yeah,
they celebrate. Baseball announcers in Japan celebrate way better than baseball announcers in America.
That's fantastic. I actually got to go.
I just would disagree with that because you haven't listened to the Twins announcers. They do a pretty good job. Also true. They do a pretty good job.
Okay. Well, time to turn on the Homer hankies distract me, John.
That's right.
Just like the one at your desk.
Oh, and by the way, I was right last time around. It was 1987.
Okay.
We went back and looked that up with Ken Herbeck and the 87 World Series. I'm not even sure you were here for that one.
Well, the funny part is Herbeck took care of Tommy Herr, and then later he took care of Ron Gant at first base.
That's right.
Kent Herbeck has a demonstrated history of just picking guys up and somehow getting away with it.
Just got to manufacture an out wherever you can get one.
That's right. That's the Minnesota way.
Okay. I asked that question with self-serving. I actually got to go to the Kansas-Arkansas game, which was big. It was an 8-1 seed upset, really exciting. And Iowa hasn't really had one of those great March Madness moments in some of the games we've hosted, and so that was pretty exciting. So. And it seems like
the Iowa teams didn't have many great moments so far. We've got one of 6 still remaining, I think. Yeah, between the men's and women's tournaments.
Yeah, actually, maybe not my favorite part of that evening because I took my 12-year-old to the basketball game. We had a great time, but maybe one of my favorite parts of that is we were driving through downtown on the way out, and he was looking at the buildings, and he said, "Dad, what's the Des Moines Register?"
Oh no!
So I thought that was kind of interesting. The state of I said, well, it's still, despite its loss of circulation, Iowa's newspaper record, and still does kind of matter. But it was kind of a interesting generational sort of thing because anyway. Okay, speaking of the media, there was an article that seems to be making the rounds today in the Washington Post about how Iowa, apparently the national media likes to snicker about Iowa becoming the Florida of the North.
Is it the national media, or is it even Iowa's own State House press corps?
I don't know. Like I said, I didn't suck the ink off the page when I was reading the article, but did you guys see this a little bit?
Yeah, John,
I did, yes.
John circulated that before the sun even came up today.
Right. No, John, you are the early riser of the team.
I was up early, but I have to confess that article was sent to me by a colleague out of state who had saw that. So, and I just forwarded on to
the idea being that Iowa is so terrible that we are the Florida of the North. Is that did I kind of get that right?
Yeah, it originated from I believe a Washington Post reporter that was basically doing a story on some of the social legislation that has passed the legislature this session, and basically saying that Iowa is just rubber stamping Ron DeSantis's policies from Florida, and that Iowa is now the Florida of the North.
Okay. You buying that, Chris?
Well, I'm not sure what we're supposed to take away from the term Florida of the North. What are we really saying there? If we're saying we have elected officials who want to make us freer and frankly who are responsive and reflective of what the people want. I mean, like one of the issues they talked about in their, gun rights. First of all, I don't know what Florida's done with gun rights lately, but Iowans just overwhelmingly voted to add it to our Constitution a few months ago, right? And despite the red wave faltering in other places, Florida and Iowa, Chris, as you pointed out this morning, are two states where it was very strong. So if you want to knock the style of Governor Reynolds, frankly, you're really knocking the desires of Iowans, because the Register's polls recently, Chris, have talked about Iowans supporting, by and large, these measures that are going through the State House.
So apparently, being like Florida, I guess, if in the liberal mindset, is a bad thing. Although net migration to Florida from places like New York City continues to advance. It's where they all want to go on vacation. It's where they all went to escape liberal COVID policies. Their economy's booming. In my mind, I just don't know where trying to be like Florida with policy is necessarily a bad thing. And then going on to what people want, you saw the Des Moines Register has been piecemealing out their poll results, and one after the other is that these so-called controversial policies are majority positions among Iowans. And I would go, and I know we talked about this earlier this morning as well, there were two states in this country, or in the last election, which overwhelmingly reelected their conservative governors by wide margins, which was Iowa and Florida.
What was the phrase? The only poll I saw was the one last November at the ballot box, and Iowa's governor won by 20 points. I think there's the public opinion poll you need to pay attention to.
The Republicans that try to act more like Democrats are the ones that had trouble getting reelected last fall, but Kim Reynolds and Ron DeSantis didn't. And those things, which I'm sure in these newsrooms, they sit around the coffee or whatever they have in the newsroom and snicker and tell jokes about how crazy these people are. But meanwhile, the people that actually live in these states that have seen what happens when you enact these policies and have that view of the world, things are pretty good in Iowa. So
that article reminded me of the liberal elite. And it reminded me of when Hillary Clinton used the basket of deplorables. Yeah. And this is just another example of liberal elites from the media basically bashing conservatives. And, I think I've shared this before, but on one of our other programs, Governor Reynolds, I think one of her early campaign commercials talked about bringing back sanity to policy, and this is exactly what she's doing and what the legislature is doing, and standing up for traditional values and sane fiscal policies. And
John, these are not actually these hyper partisan issues. It's simply trying to return us to some common sense and some freedoms, right? Like not having government control so many aspects of our lives, which frankly is kind of the basis from which this country was founded. So are we running some hyper partisan direction, or are we just trying to get back to basics and sort of life as we've always understood?
These are issues, and the polling has, I think, supported that Iowans are in support of what this governor is doing, and using that phrase, it's the great silent majority.
Well, and it's
standing up to this radical nonsense.
And it's nothing new, but these liberals and in the media and that believe they are the enlightened ones, they are our betters. They cannot conceive that there is an informed counter argument to their nonsensical bills, and they have it's an arrogance that comes with it that these rubes from flyover country that can barely figure out how to brush their teeth could not possibly understand how informed and educated we are, and yet here we are, right? And we're just saying that we've got a better idea and it works. And yes, I graduated high school. I can understand these things. So it's just fine. Knock yourselves out, guys. But guess what? Here in Iowa, we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing it this way. And you can find whatever pejorative you want to try and knock us down. But the plan is working, and we're doing it, and deal with it. And you guys can stay in your places like Illinois and New York and California, your basket case states where nothing works. In your general public,
Minnesota, John.
Minnesota.
Well,
in your general public, even if they're reelecting you, knows that your policies suck, but the only reason they're reelecting you is because they're still mad at Donald Trump. Fine, keep doing that, but it doesn't work. So there we go.
Well, we've even seen examples where the local media has been trying to find people who are threatening to leave the state because of this. And when you look at our neighbors to the north, you brought up Minnesota. People are leaving Minnesota because of the not just the poor fiscal policies, but the radical woke ideology that's making people sick and wanting to go to a place like Iowa or Florida where there's common sense.
Yes. I look.
I mean, they're
it
true.
is possible that Iowa might not be the perfect place for a radical leftist. I can envision that maybe we just don't have enough of the right flags up in our schools to make you feel comfortable. And maybe you would be better served in San Francisco. Like, I can imagine that. But for the most of the rest of us, this is a pretty good place that things are working and going better. And so, yes. Okay. You want to talk about state budget?
I want to.
But no, there is. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We're in a cultural war, and this is I think Governor Reynolds has drawn a line,
right?
And same with Governor DeSantis. And
the last thing I'll chime in, because I can't top what you just said, but I feel a need to get this out, is sometimes I think that the liberal elite mindset uses these terms or says these things, and they want us to be offended by it or to defend it. And I just go, no, I agree with you. And I think back to, I think it was Barack Obama, maybe then candidate Obama in 2008, who said they're just clinging to their gods and their guns. And and I would say, like, yes, that's true. Yeah, those are two very important things in our home. Yes, you're correct.
Like, if we're like Florida, great. We don't have Disney World, we don't have beaches, and we don't have alligators. But yeah, I mean, great. I'm happy to be here. It's spring.
Our businesses were open. Our schools were open. Yes, all those things.
Okay, good. Okay, well, we have to move on from that. We haven't really had a chance to talk much about the Revenue Estimating Conference, which met, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, to give us our look at the March look at the current next year fiscal year revenue. And we can get bogged down in numbers on it. But John, you wrote an article, and I know that Sarah had another piece on the foundation, but I'll start with kind of my perspective. Big picture, the state of Iowa is still over collecting on taxes, and we've got a lot of money. And so we have to figure out what to do with it. But John, fill us in on what we kind of need to know about where we're going with Iowa's budget and tax policy.
Yeah. So this estimate that came out sets the stage for the budget that they're currently working on. And as we saw from the estimate, and Director Paulson mentioned this, that basically Iowa's revenues are still coming in very strongly, even with the tax cuts that were passed last year. And we're seeing that basically that Iowa's surpluses are still projected into the coming fiscal years. And we see that reserves are still full. The taxpayer relief fund is close to $3 billion now, and looking at increasing more later. So even there was I noticed in some of the media articles after the REC meeting where they quoted especially some of the Democrat legislators who were saying that, well, this is a symptom of, the state losing revenue because of the tax cuts.
Chris, isn't you're saying that's a feature, not a bug? Meaning,
Yes.
like, that's how tax cuts are supposed to work, is the state should collect
Yes.
less
Right.
money so we can hold on to more of ours because they don't need it all.
Yeah. Yes. When legislators looked at the fiscal note, which projected the loss of state revenue from the tax cuts, that was exciting. Yes, let's do that.
And I think the real point from the RAC meeting was that, the loss is not even significant. I mean, it's still minor. I mean, that's how much revenues are coming in. Revenues are very healthy, and so it's not, government is not being gutted by this.
That's correct. Let's draw that distinction that year over year our revenue is going to tick down ever so slightly. But even at that point, because we have been over collecting so much, our spending can and will continue to grow. We can continue to fund the priorities of government, as you frequently say, John, and yet we can also start giving money back to people, right? We are getting our revenues and expenses trued up now at this point.
Right. And we talked about this in the episode following the ITR NFIB tax day luncheon, because Director Paulson talked about this, the budget director, who's part of the REC, is that right now you see that, if you were to graph this out with a couple of lines, that our revenue collections continue to run far ahead of what we actually budget. Now, as you cut taxes, those lines come closer together. Now, when we originally passed the 3.9% flat tax, those lines came pretty close together to line it up
in the future.
Yeah. But what we're hearing now is that they don't even touch again, even with 3.9% flat tax. Even as we implement all of those projected reductions in revenue, we're still going to be running ahead.
So if we're still running ahead, more revenue than we need, what should we do, John? Yeah, lean into the mic for this one.
Yeah. No, we need to continue the rate reductions.
Now, John, we talk. Your article talks, and I think you mentioned this about because you're right, that we're projected to have $3.5 billion in the taxpayer relief fund, which is getting on about, 40% of the annual budget of the state of Iowa. Mm-hmm. If you were a city or county in Iowa and had all those surplus funds sitting around, you would raise your tax rates, right? So you're saying that the state should cut their tax rates.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just just trying to make sure.
Well, and this is where I think we have to give credit to the Senate and with Leader Whitver and Senator Dawson and their income tax bill that is currently working through the process of that would continue lowering the 3.9% flat tax to 2.5%, and then using the taxpayer relief fund to eliminate the income tax gradually. And that was the original intent of that fund when it was created, was for income tax relief. And so that piece of legislation is very appropriate, and it also shows the strength of Iowa's fiscal policies because ever since they started doing tax reform since 2018, Iowa has built this really strong fiscal foundation. And if you think about it, we're doing very well, especially with all the economic uncertainty at the national level. And so I think this has proven that, Iowa's, the policies of cutting taxes, of prudent budgeting and conservative revenue estimates pays off.
What we need to keep harping on, and you do in your article, is spending restraint. So keeping that growth of spending controlled is what sets the stage and makes it possible to have additional income tax cuts. And that's been something that's been very important to this family of organizations. And another part of that is making sure that we don't saddle the state's general fund with other expenses, right? Not shifting things from a local level to a state level, because again, every dollar we start spending, every additional dollar we start spending out of the general fund is dollars that don't get to be used for future tax cuts.
That's right. Yeah.
And so when it can be very tempting to spend on a new program or try to buy something from some other level of government, that's really putting the tax cuts at risk.
Policymakers have a very simple choice to make. Look, we can do the math. We know that the state's collecting more in revenue from taxpayers than it needs to operate. So you can either spend more or give it back to folks through rate reductions. Now, not only, going back to the fact that Republicans and Governor Reynolds campaigned on tax cuts and were elected by wide margins, so should be an indicator that that's the path forward. You've seen the Des Moines Register's polling, which shows that a path towards income tax elimination is a majority position among Iowans. So it seems pretty straightforward that when faced with the decision of growing government or giving it back to taxpayers, that the path forward, the appropriate one, would be let's cut taxes.
Yep.
And we're in a great position to do it. So good. John, thanks for the article. Thanks for the information, except for the Homer Hanky part. But anyway, all right. Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing this, like and subscribe with your friends, all of that good stuff. And so have a great day, and we will see you next time on ITR Live.